Lutherans hold to penal substitutionary atonement? Is there a Lutheran distinction in the way they define it? So maybe you could explain for our viewers what is penal substitutionary atonement and the Lutheran understanding of it specifically.
Yeah, so penal substitution is not really language that we use that often. The language of penal substitution tends to be more a Reformed language, or the idea that Christ is punished on our behalf. Specifically for the Reformed, it implies the notion of his receiving the wrath of God upon himself on the cross in place of the elect, specifically. That tends to predominate a lot of the Reformed conversations about the atonement. In terms of how Lutherans formulate the atonement, we largely agree with the presentation in that we believe that Christ suffered on the cross and he paid our penalty on the cross, but we would say it's a universal thing. But we tend to use language of the phrase that's used among Lutheran theologians is a vicarious satisfaction. So we speak about Jesus satisfying the demands of the divine law, the demands of God's law, right? God's law demands death. We owe God death because that's the punishment that he gave due to sin for violating his law. We see that in the garden. And to use Athanasius's language, there is a debt of death that we all owe to God. Christ vicariously in our place dies that death that we deserve on our behalf. And in faith, we receive that so that we don't have to face that punishment ourselves. So it's very similar to how the Calvinists speak, but it tends not to, we just don't tend to use the language penal substitution very much. Sometimes you'll find Lutherans using it. And I think there's more, probably it's the difference of maybe be more an emphasis than actual theology. We would tend to emphasize satisfaction of the divine law rather than emphasizing the appeasement of wrath. But it's not that, but those things are all tied together too. So it's not like we would say that's not true.
Okay. Now, was Christ's physical death the specific payment, like we deserve to physically die and Jesus paid, or is it somehow like, in Revelation there's the first death and the second death? Is he taking somehow like our eternal wrath upon himself on the cross? Would you what would you say about that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, the death that's implied in Genesis 3 with the fall, I think is not just physical death. But there certainly is a spiritual death that happens, as spiritual death being removed from the presence of God as they're kicked out of Eden. So yeah, we would certainly say that there's both physical and spiritual death that are punishments of sin, and Christ does take both of those upon himself.